Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So today I am going to be drawing another Honkai Star Rail character, and it's been actually a character that I've always wanted to draw ever since she was introduced in the story, alongside with I guess just like being leaked and everything surrounding her. So I am going to be drawing Robin from Honkai Star Rail, and if you're not too familiar who she is, I'll put a picture on the screen, but the footage that you're going to be seeing for at least for the next few seconds is actually me kind of doing a pose for her, but I actually don't end up liking it all that much, so I decided to show it anyways, and then I'm going to scrap it in the end. So let's go ahead and restart with the sketch now. So even though I scrapped the old pose, I still go through a few iterations with this current one, and I believe I cut out the majority of it because I was gonna eventually have her like maybe extend her arm out as if she's like gesturing to us. If you're not familiar with the character, she is I guess like kind of like an idol, a singer, so it felt a little bit more appropriate to have her singing for the potential pose that I wanted to put her in. So instead of having like idol pose where it's a little bit more typical and the arm is kind of reaching outwards, I decided that I would change it up and do more of I don't know how to explain this. So I wanted her to be holding a mic in one hand and then raising her arm with the other hand, like she's gesturing to the sky, or just like, you know, just raising her hand up basically. So because of that, I ended up having to extend the canvas a lot larger. So usually when I do these kinds of drawings and illustrations, especially for like fan art and stuff, if there is a possibility that I'm going to print this or make it into some kind of like printed media, I will try to take in consideration the aspect ratio or the size of the canvas. So oftentimes if I know I'm working a little bit small and I like to work more in a portrait type of format, I will work with a 5x7 inch canvas, 300 dpi, and then I will move up to 8.5 by 11, which is kind of like a standard letter sheet of paper or like printer paper. And then because I wanted to extend it even more, because that's what I initially had it set to, I believe I went by 11 by 14 or 11 by 17, which are typical poster sized dimensions for a lot of like printed media. So it gave me a little bit more room to play around with having the majority of like her waist up alongside with her outstretched arm to be kind of in view. Alongside that, I wanted to include a little bit more of kind of like a vast background to the piece, and having it more vertical allowed me to have a little bit more space to play around with that as well. So moving along, we are doing our actual more cleaner sketch, which will be what I'm going to be using for my base whenever I start to do coloring, and then I will merge my colors and the sketch together to do my rendering. But for some reason, I really enjoyed sketching out Robin, and I actually really liked the sketch and how it turned out, but you'll see a little bit later that I'm gonna fuss around, especially with her face, because I make some last minute changes before I start to render. And the reason being is that during the sketching phase, I think everything was like more or less okay. I think I did draw her head a little bit too large at the very beginning, but later on I'll buff out her body a little bit so it's a little bit more proportioned. But the problem I run into is that as I was like drawing her hair and kind of like going back and forth with using my reference, so sometimes I guess like you can kind of see my reflection for some reason in today's recording. So if you see my hand go up, sometimes I'm holding my phone looking at a reference of Robin, and sometimes if I go into autopilot mode, I will just sketch what I kind of think the character looks like, and then later on realize that I need to correct it. So because I do that occasionally when I was drawing Robin, because her outfit's actually not too bad in terms of like patterning and design, it's actually quite a little bit more simple compared to, let's say, some other Honkai Star Rail characters or even like Genshin characters, where there's sometimes just way too many details. Or even like VTubers as well, they have like immense amount of detail. But for Robin, I thought I understood her hairstyle. So initially when I was drawing her pose, I was gonna have like a bunch of hair kind of push towards her face, which is like the part that I'm drawing right now, because of her arm being raised. So I thought it would look nice, but with Robin's hair, it's actually only like a little bit of, I don't know if it's like flyaways or just like smaller pieces that kind of like frame her face ever so delicately, and I wasn't sure if it still looked like Robin unless I kind of followed the shape of her hair a little bit more closely. So I decided to knock back that giant chunk that kind of like cuts into her face, and because of that the proportions of her face gets a little bit wonky. I then lose the center point, and then it feels like she's more turned to the left of the canvas, and it just makes kind of like a spiraling effect of me having mistake after mistake after mistake. But hopefully when I get into the coloring and the rendering, I will slowly start to fix it, and I will slowly stop dreading working on this piece, because at this point I'm super enjoying the sketching portion for the most part. So there is one portion I wish I spent a little bit more time figuring out how I wanted to lay everything out, which is the majority of her. So to explain her hairstyle a little bit, it's more like of a half updo. So she has like the majority of her hair above, where around her ears are kind of tied behind her, and then she actually has really long hair that's a little bit wavy. It's kind of like crosses over if you look at her model in game. So because I didn't really spend a lot of time doing that, I did have to spend more time during the rendering portion trying to figure out strands and all that so that her hair makes a little bit more sense. But it would have been nice to plan that out during the sketching phase, more so than later on having to kind of like avoid her body, because I tend to render everything on one layer anyways. So it's just something I should take a little bit more into consideration when I'm doing the sketching portion, because for the most part, sometimes when I do sketching, I go like really ham into the face and the hair and just anything surrounding the face, and then everything else kind of gets pushed into like secondary position where it's like it's not important or as important to me. But I feel like I should try to delegate more energy towards everything equally so that things just don't get lost in terms of not having enough detail or just being too vague before I actually have to start doing details and rendering in the very end. So now that we have our clean sketch done, I'm actually going ahead and checking how many layers I have available. I never really work in this size, so I wanted to check what I was going to be working with, because I knew I wanted to do the thing that I usually do at the end, which is to copy majority of my layers. Then I can duplicate them, then flatten it, then I can Gaussian blur and kind of like soften everything up. And then we can kind of choose where I want the viewer to kind of focus a little bit more on the figure by erasing. So we'll get into that once we get there. But first, before we color Robin, I want to tackle a background. So I'm keeping the background simple. I did not want to spend an enormous amount of time on trying to make the background look super elaborate, but I knew that I wanted to do some sort of like cityscape in a sense, and because like the kind of place where Robin is in Honkai Star Rail, which is like Penacony, it's more of like a city in a sense, like a very bustling city. Like if you had to think of a place kind of like Las Vegas, I feel like would be somewhere that would make more sense. Like there's a lot of performances, there's probably like casinos or like places of like entertainment, and it's like very lively, very bright. But I wanted to keep the color palette a little bit more towards and tailored towards Robin. So she has a little bit more of like blues and purples and whites and a little bit of pink and gold. So I wanted to make sure that the buildings were not going to compete too much, but I still wanted it to kind of match and, I don't know, just resemble her in a sense. So I decided to keep everything a little bit more blue and pink and added some clouds to the very top. Majority of the time when I'm working on Procreate and you guys are seeing me draw for like videos and stuff, or just doing like the normal digital painting process that I tend to go through, I mostly use like free staple brushes. So I have a sketching brush that I like to use. I have a painting brush, which is kind of like what I do for like all my flats, alongside with like majority of like coloring and shading before we get to the rendering stage. And after that we have the sharp render brush, which I like to use as kind of like the final step of my drawing process where I mostly do a lot of cleanup and sharpening everything up. So it's just easier for me to get those clean, crisp edges alongside with getting thinner lines. But for the clouds, I did use a softer brush, which I made like quite a while ago. So it's kind of resembling an airbrush, but I feel like it's a little bit more dense and is less airy compared to an airbrush, and I found it a little bit easier for me to get a lighter texture for the clouds rather than having to rely on making my hand very light and using my painting brush to do so. So I just wanted to do that instead. I think like for the most part I tried to stick with the 3 brushes just because it's a little bit easier than me having to go back and forth and choosing, but sometimes it's just faster and easier if you find a brush that can be a little bit more specific to what you want it to do and just work with that. So moving along, we are coloring in Robin. So I have been liking using the lasso tool and the color fill option for it to fill in the entirety of the figure. That way I can kind of not need to be so careful with using the painting brush to kind of like go up to the edges of the lines and kind of color within my sketch to make everything look super clean before we end up alpha locking it, which will allow me to color within where I placed the color initially, and then we can start to shade. So after that, I noticed that Robin was looking a little bit too cool and a little bit too pale, so I decided to put an overlay layer, which for some reason my camera is making it look extremely pink, so I do apologize. She's not actually this super vibrant, so you'll probably see at the very end that it looks a little bit more subdued compared to what you were seeing on my camera, but it's due to the overlay layer that I initially put on so that I could kind of shift the color temperature a little bit more. Then next is the next struggle that I get into, which is her hair color. So I've talked about this in the past where my phone automatically has like the blue light filter on because I look at my phone a lot, and it's mostly because I use it for references and I tend to draw either closer to like nighttime, evening, and I don't always turn on like my lamps or my lights properly, so I tend to look at my phone in the dark. So I prefer to have it be a little bit on the warmer side, and I mean by a little bit I mean a lot. So when I was looking up references of Robin, some of them appeared more like purple or like periwinkle color rather than a softer, warmer blue, if that makes sense. Even though I'm saying like warmer blue, some people will probably be like, oh, that's just purple or whatever. But there's kind of like an in-between that I needed, and I kept leaning it initially to blue, then later on I made it to purple, and then I kind of found a good middle ground by mixing the two, and then lightly airbrushing a good kind of pinkish color into her hair as well, because she has a very, I guess, a kind of like a slight gradient. So as we get lower and lower into her longer portion of her hair, it gradually gets a little bit darker and more towards purple rather than the softer kind of warmer blue in a sense. So for the most part, actually, is it a warmer blue? It's like pushing towards purple, periwinkle-ish color, if anything. So after that, I decided that I would just work on her outfit. After I finished her skin and her eyes, then we'll go in and add in some of the shadows for her hair as well. I think I decided that I would do it last because I didn't add like hair strands in a way that made sense in terms of my sketch, which I mentioned earlier that I should have planned out better. But because of that, I was kind of low-key avoiding adding in any of the shadows because I knew it was going to be a little bit of a pain to do. But in terms of like Honkai Star Rail characters, I think I talked briefly about that in Aventurine's little sketch page session that I did like a week or two ago. And I am having a little bit of a dilemma where I really would like to summon for Robin, but I think I'm going to wait and summon for Firefly first because I also really want Firefly, and I was like dead set on wanting to summon for her right at the beginning of meeting her in the game. But I do like Robin more and more, and not only that, she's like super cute. Oh, also, if you're not like a fan of Honkai Star Rail, or you have like no intentions of getting into the lore or playing the game or anything like that, or even the characters, at least listen to her song. I think it's called If I Can Stop One Heart From Breaking. You can probably find it easy if you put Honkai Star Rail or like Robin, If I Can Stop One Heart From Breaking into YouTube. I'll make sure to link it in the description. But the singer that portrays Robin, or I guess like the voice behind Robin's singing voice, I think their name is Chevy, but their voice is so pretty, and I love that song so much. I don't know, that song just hurts me. It just feels like it's one of those songs, like it's so pretty that it hurts, because the I guess like the meaning behind it, alongside like if you played the game, I think it hits home a little bit harder. But nonetheless, I will link it in the description and you guys should check it out. It's a very pretty song, so I think you guys would actually really like it, even if you're not into Star Rail at all. But let's move on. So to place Robin a little bit more into her background, I decided to put a overlay layer on top of her, or a multiply layer, I believe, and it's kind of a softer, like a bluish purple, and eventually I will add a overlay layer on top of it to make her skin pop a little bit more, like right here, so that she doesn't get too lost and it doesn't seem too one note. After that, I merged those effect layers, and I don't think I really added too much of a rim lighting in terms of using the add or like the luminosity. But for me, it was a little bit easier for me to just erase where the multiply wasn't going to be, and I used that as my rim lighting instead. But merging down all of my little effect layers, blend mode layers, whatever you want to call them, back onto my already merged sketch and colored layer, we can go ahead and move on to the rendering. So I am going to fuss with her face so many times, but luckily, because you guys are only going to be seeing this portion of the video, I do cut out a lot of my fussing with it. Now, I think, let me actually check. I'm going to check how long I actually spent working on this particular drawing. Also, my chair is really squeaky. So I have my iPad open with the statistics of this drawing, and basically I am looking at the track time, and I spent 10 hours and a half, so 10 hours and 37 minutes on this particular drawing, which is a little bit on the longer side technically, but this is not taking in considerations like if I'm taking breaks. Like the way how Procreate tracks the time is just like actual, I guess like strokes or like whatever actions are being made on the app itself, like the program. So like if you're drawing, erasing, undoing, redoing, I don't know, fiddling around with the blend modes and like all the settings and stuff, then it will count towards your drawing time on Procreate. So it's probably a lot longer, but a good chunk of that 10 hours is probably me fixing up her face. So I go back and forth during the coloring portion where I'm like liquefying. I'm also like lassoing and trying to fix things a little bit. Then I will try to fix it more and more when I'm kind of like doing the rendering portion. And you can see that I'm like chipping away at her hair, certain portions, and then later on, I think this might have been before. If not, I do chunk out a portion of the hair that loops behind her head, which is like between her arm, like right here, because I'm painting over it again because I'm trying to create a gap between her arm and her head a little bit, because I feel like it was getting merged too much. And if you saw my initial sketch, I actually had her head leaning towards the right into her arm because it looked kind of cute. But instead I decided to lean her head the opposite way to kind of create that gap. Now, I am definitely inexperienced with drawing the anatomy portion of like the body and stuff, especially if they are not covered by clothing. I can have a little bit more wiggle room and I can get away with it if they are like fully clothed. But for Robin, when she raises her arm, or if she does raise her arm, part of her shoulder and I guess like the underside of her arm, like near her armpit and above like the chest area, is exposed. And I've never actually drawn a person raising their arm with that part being exposed, and I forgot how weird it looks. So if you raise your arm, it's like a portion of your skin where it goes back into, I don't know, it's like your clavicle area, like your shoulder. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know enough terminology to describe the body, but it does look a little funky sometimes, especially if, like, let's say if you have more skin, sometimes you can see more, or if you have more musculature, you probably see a kind of more defined line that kind of goes down from where your shoulder goes in back into your body, if that makes sense. So I was struggling a little bit, and I think initially when I was sketching out Robin with her hair coming towards her face, I was using it a little bit to hide that portion of the shoulder so I wouldn't have to worry about it. So if it still looks a little bit too wide or a little bit off, I do apologize. I probably should have looked up a proper reference of a person raising their arm, or to take a picture of my own body doing it, because it would have been a little bit more accurate. So if anything, don't look too closely, I guess. So in terms of like design, I really like any design that has more of like celestial or like astronomy, or I don't know, space kind of design. So like anything like sun, moon, stars, galaxies, anything like that. I really do like those like little details. I just think they look super pretty, and often colors associated with them look super pretty too. So for Robin, I was already really excited to draw her. Now I have been wanting to draw Firefly as well, and I have not really looked too closely at her design. All I know is that one, I like Firefly a lot for many reasons, and then two, her color scheme I really love. So I definitely do want to draw more of her, but I might wait until the next update is out, which is going to be super soon, which is why I also wanted to draw Robin, because she's going to be available soon to summon for. So if you're summoning for her, good luck. I am definitely going to wait for the rerun, I think, but it's still quite fun to draw some of the upcoming characters, because I don't know, it's just like a whole plethora of characters that I feel like I have an unlimited amount to draw from, and it always feels like a new learning experience sometimes when it's like a character that I'm not familiar with, so I have to learn how to draw their clothing or how the hair works, or like if I want to follow a specific aesthetic for them, I have to look up more references and stuff. And I'm trying my best, at least when I can, to be a little bit more ambitious with, let's say, doing less of just like, oh, it's a headshot with another blurred background. I'm not saying that this one's any better than what I just said, but I'm trying my best to kind of push myself out of that, because that's definitely my comfort zone. And I just know, like, for me, I know it works because it still looks pretty. I tend to like the airier kind of like lighter aesthetic too. I like drawing flowers, but eventually I would like to branch out a little bit more, get a little bit more ambitious so I don't get too comfy staying in drawing similar things all the time. But for the most part, if I still want to do like something for myself that's a little bit more easier, I probably will default to that again. But if not, I will try my best to do some stuff that are a little bit more ambitious. And if I can, I will record the process and share it with you guys if you would like me to. So hopefully I will do that in the future. But where are we at here? So I guess for the most part, I did the majority of her outfit. I started to add a little bit of the details. So for these, I decided to keep them simple and not worry about the values too much. So any of the darker values, I just used less pressure so that more of the undercolor shows through, which makes it appear darker. After that, I decided to do the patterning of, I don't know if this is like lace or just some kind of patterning. I'm also using the warp tool to kind of wrap it around her arm a little bit to create a little bit of that curvature in the shape of her arm, I guess, because I didn't want it to read super flat. So hopefully it reads a little bit better. Then we're just finishing up some of these smaller details here. Also, I should have mentioned, when I did the background and just like the clouds and everything, and you'll see some like little circles in the back that kind of gives it a slight bokeh effect, none of that was planned. If you saw, or you will see, my sketch at the very end when I'm doing the time lapse, I only did like a few sparkles in the sky with her when I planned out her pose. So it might be another reason why sometimes I don't feel confident in the background, is because I don't plan enough, so I don't look up like proper references for me to draw things that I'm not sure how to draw. So use reference if you're not sure how to draw something, because it's definitely good to try your best to learn from something that's already pre-existing and incorporating that to your own drawing. Oh, I also added kind of like a balcony or some kind of fencing, or I guess it's like a fencing balcony thing around her, just because I thought it'd be a little bit nicer. And I don't know, I've always wanted to add something like that to this piece as well, but I just don't know if it was a little bit too busy with her hair flowing around, and then we had like the cityscape behind her. So I don't think it's like, it doesn't stand out too much, but I don't know if it's like super necessary either. After that, I did the thing where I merged all my layers together after copying them, Gaussian blurred it, and then I erased to make some stuff into focus. After that, I ended up adding a little bit of details on top. So a sparkle here, a sparkle there, and then after that, I end up wanting to add some kind of text to this piece. So I'm not in love with my handwriting, but sometimes with stabilization, it does make your handwriting look a little bit fancier. So I upped the stabilization on these, like one of the calligraphy brushes that you can find default on Procreate. So I decided that I wanted to write her name in the sky, because I was gonna write "if I can stop one heart from breaking," but that's way too long and I don't want to put too much cursive on here, so I decided to just put her name. But to make it look a little bit less boring, other than, you know, just having it in the sky, which I'll kind of shift it upwards a little bit, I decided to duplicate it and make a reflection. So initially I had it a little bit dark, but instead I duplicated this, changed it to screen so that we can have it a little bit lighter, but it's not too bright. That way it kind of looks like, I don't know, it's kind of like a cool effect. I've done this before in the past, but I've never really utilized it anymore. So that's kind of it. I'm kind of debating where the placement of the text should be, just in case that I need to shift it if I ever get this printed. But that is it for today's little drawing session of Robin. I did spend 2 days drawing her, so yeah, this session definitely felt a lot longer when I was doing the recording. But hopefully you guys enjoyed watching the process of me drawing Robin, and I don't know, I actually really like this illustration. I still want to fuss with her face a little bit more, but for the most part, I'm happy with the results, and I think she actually turned out really pretty alongside with the color scheme of everything and the text. So yeah, I think that's where I'm gonna leave you guys with today's video, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!